like to talk about economic decision-making as distinguished from political decision-making. And I'd like to start off with a definition of an economy. An economy is not just a system for producing goods and services and distributing them, because the Garden of Eden was not an economy, since there was no scarcity. So economics is the study of the use of scarce resources, which have alternative uses. So that rationing is inherent in the circumstances. Competition is inherent in the circumstances. There are people, particularly among intellectuals, who think that competition is one of those things we can choose to have or not have, when in fact the only choice we have is how shall the competition be carried out. The rationing is inherent whether it's under capitalism, socialism, feudalism, or any other kind of method. So scarcity is the first lesson of economics. Now, the first lesson of politics is to forget the first lesson of economics. It's popular to call politics the art of the possible. I call it the art of the plausible, because what you're advocating doesn't have to be possible. The Clinton health care program, for example, is Democratic Senator Patrick Moynihan referred to the statistics and the estimates of the cost of this program as fantasy. But there's no reason why you cannot enact fantasy into law. There are many laws which show fantasy has been enacted. Let me give you a concrete example of what an economy involves, because an economy involves trade-offs. Politics involves solutions, real or imaginary. Some years ago, there was a tragic airplane crash in which a baby was killed by being torn from its mother's arms. In Washington, the answer was quite clear. We must have laws that say that babies cannot be held in mothers' arms in airplanes. They must have their own separate seat where they're strapped in. Fortunately or unfortunately, a couple of economists got hold of this, and they figured out what would be the probable result of such a law. First of all, it means that every couple that's traveling with a baby would have to buy 3 seats instead of 2. And therefore, they would have 50% higher costs of transportation. Now, since to ordinary people in the real world, as it's distinguished from Washington, money matters. And therefore, some of those people would not fly. Some would take alternative transportation on the ground, almost all of which has a higher fatality rate than airplanes. And so they estimated that in the course of a decade, you would save 1 baby's life, and you would lose the lives of 60 other people, as well as $72 million. So the whole perspective of trade-offs is typically lacking in political decision-making. People ask such questions as, in politics, is nuclear power safe? And the answer is no, because if nuclear power were safe, it would be the only safe thing on the face of the earth. The only question is, compared to what? Compared to hydroelectric dams? Compared to doing without electricity? There's a story which I hope is apocryphal of an economist who was on the street, met a friend who said, "How are you? How's your wife?" To which the economist replied, "Compared to what?" So looking at nuclear power in this way, it is far safer than any alternative method of producing electricity. Someone calculated how many lives are lost for every so many billion kilowatt hours of electricity, because human lives are among the price paid for generating electricity. And having calculated this, they asked how many lives would be lost generating the amount of electricity that would have been generated by 3 Mile Island during the time that it was shut down. And the answer was 52 lives. No lives were lost at 3 Mile Island, even during the, quote, disaster, unquote. 2 people were killed on the highway trying to get away from 3 Mile Island. Someone has calculated the risk to your life of various kinds of activities. Living within 5 miles of a nuclear power plant for half a century represents the same risk to your life as driving 10 miles on the interstate highway, or spending half an hour in a coal mine, or 6 minutes in a canoe. And I think of all the environmentalists in their canoes worrying about nuclear power plants. There's a whole literature about safety. I think the crucial book was Unsafe at Any Speed by Ralph Nader about the Corvair. And the argument was that because the Corvair was a rear-engine car, it had certain safety problems peculiar to that kind of car, and that these problems were disregarded when the car was produced. And of course, he has all the particular individuals who died as a result of these things. And I took a lot of interest in this since I was driving a Corvair at the time. And it's certainly true that there are different handling characteristics to a rear-engine car, which makes it more prone to certain kinds of accidents. But what Nader apparently didn't have time to get around to was that it's less prone to other kinds of accidents. And therefore, no matter where you put the engine, if you put the engine in the front, if you put it on the top or the bottom or either side, it would have some kinds of accidents that it was more likely to have and other kinds that it's less likely to have. And the studies that have been done indicate the Corvair was no more dangerous on net balance than any other car of that era. There are many other areas where the desire for safety, for categorical safety, for solutions, not for trade-offs, affect political decision making. For example, pharmaceutical drugs and vaccines very often save many thousands of lives. But sometimes the side effects of the drugs or the diseases you catch from the vaccine itself cause crippling illnesses and sometimes fatal illnesses. And of course, if you allow everyone who has suffered these effects to sue the pharmaceutical companies, then of course the pharmaceutical companies have every incentive to cut back on the production of existing drugs and vaccines and to reduce their investment in producing new drugs and new vaccines to find cures for diseases that are killing people today.